the only smart thing I've ever done in construction is to continue to be curious about how to figure things out. If the clouds of vape and saying bloat was going to be a problem. But
well, mics are hot, baby. So the clouds of
so.
vape, the clouds of vape and saying glot is just par for the course. But this is a family-friendly show. Builders, Budgets, and Beers is for a whoever who wants to chime in audience. So we don't have to be sailors, but if you let a little F-bomb fly here every once in a while, it's okay.
Don't let it get too dark.
Yeah, exactly. But dude, thanks for jumping on. Appreciate it. For everybody that is listening, hopefully if you're watching this, you get to see the awesome buffalo mount behind my good friend Gabe Joseph. But Gabe, go ahead and give the listeners a little background on yourself, a little intro.
Sure, yeah. My name is Gabe Joseph. I'm a partner in Joseph Design Build in Austin, Texas. Been in construction virtually my whole life in one way or another, but in Austin the last 10 years here. And along with some other partners, we've got projects in Houston, Austin, Dallas, and looking to kind of expand from there. So a little bit of everything.
100% love it. And I think just for the listeners, you can tune back. I can't remember how many episodes, but a few episodes, and you can get a little bit of a preface with Thomas Joseph, who is Gabe's brother. And Gabe, just with you mentioning that, like, you guys are in Houston and like expanding all over Texas, like, when did that start? Because you guys were primarily in Austin for like,
we
10 years.
Yeah, no, that we actually, so we went through the process of a merger with a company based in Houston starting about 9 months ago. And so in the last 9 months, we sort of expanded our footprint across Texas, but then also at the same time kind of scaled up our design and engineering operations to fold in some staff overseas in a couple of different countries. And our pipeline volume went up pretty significantly. It went from about 15 to 20 houses a year to around 300 now. So it's been a very, very rapid path, to growth and kind of navigating everything that goes with that.
Dude, 9 months, call it what, 30x growth?
Somewhere there, yeah. Somewhere between 20 and
30. Like, how, that doesn't even make sense. How do you do that comfortably? And I know that's like a huge question, but like, that's just insane. You have you have 300 units, huh? Go ahead.
Yeah. That's right now. There's about between design, permitting, and construction. That's total. You don't do it comfortably. You do it as uncomfortably as you're willing to admit.
Yeah, sure, totally.
You know what though? Before we get too far, I just want to point out, if anybody can see this, Reece, that beard should be a state park in Colorado. That is just flawless. You get like hippies chaining themselves to the base so that you don't shave it. Like, that's just
incredible. Exactly. It's like the mud flap, dude. It's like the mud flap. This beard gets so much attention. I mean, hey, it's a fine beard. It's a fine beard.
They would have to inject me with like elephant levels of testosterone to produce a beard like that. So I'm jealous, brother.
Dude, yeah, just born with incredibly high T. I mean, it's more of a lifestyle than anything. Just ingesting pounds of red meat a day. Just an absolute, just corn-fed Nebraska beef raised, baby. Wow. Yeah, dude. Yeah, the beard. I get it. And we don't, if you're getting a little uncomfortable, Gabe, just going super deep into, the hyper growth scale and just business magicians that you and your brother are, we can take a slow roll here.
No, not at all. I would say, I'd preface by saying, I'm happy to talk about anything you want. And if anybody's listening to this, they should take everything I say as the opinion of an idiot who knows very little and is just figuring it out as he goes for a very long time now. So
not true. And I'll debunk it with this question. How did you get into construction? I think I've heard this story just like in the years that we've known each other, but like, just to prove that you're not an idiot and you've been in this game forever and you look at business through a pretty interesting lens. How'd you get into it?
Yeah. So my brother and I grew up in a family in upstate New York, where our grandfather had been a small builder. Our father was a builder and small developer, kind of rode the boom and bust wave through the 80s and 90s. And so we had the benefit of being around a lot of experience, but didn't come from an established business. Bootstrapped this ourselves. I started off as a framer, and then from there a superintendent, and from there a PM. And so kind of we were able to rise up kind of through the ranks and put it together more or less organically, but very blood and guts, very much, started with bags on and, kind of went from there. And found out pretty early on, we were much more interested in the business of construction than the nuts and bolts. Like, yeah, I can plumb a wall, but I like doing what I'm doing now a lot better. And I charge the same rate for either activity. So
yeah, totally, dude. I love it, and I think I want to dig in on that because I think it was just the last episode that I did. We were talking about like the difference of like builders being bags on and like just drooling over the craft, and then this like dynamic that happens where you realize like it's a business, and like you really do have to like pivot into this business mindset, not discounting that it is a craft, and you need to take pride in your work, and you are delivering a very reputation based, huge asset investment for the consumer product. But I think that's where a lot of builders, they just kind of like, they get to these points of like struggle of they try and scale a business and it flops. And then they just go back into like, well, we're just going to do it all of ourselves. And they can't like really get to that hump. So at what point did you and Thomas start to like understand that you guys love the business side of construction, arguably more than the craft?
it's a really interesting question. And I think, yeah, at some point you kind of accept that, okay, an excellent execution, right? Like the fact that the house has to be, or the building, whatever it is, has to be done at a really high level. That shouldn't be the goal. I think in this business, that should just be the baseline. Like, yeah, you got to produce an excellent product or nobody's going to buy it and you're not going to go very far. But once you get comfortable with that, then you start looking at, okay, what's next? And then you find that building the machinery around an operation is very similar to building anything. You're just doing it with people instead of materials. And if that happens to be interesting, then it can be a really, really interesting path. So I think that probably clicked. That probably clicked for me about 10 years ago. And we didn't really have the opportunity to start doing it at a significant scale until about a year ago, about fall of 2024. So we kind of had it in our minds for a long time, had spent a couple of years chasing, private equity funding to expand. That really wasn't happening at that time, or more to the point, wasn't happening with infill spec developers in a, hot bubble market in Austin, Texas. So I think, yeah, the seed for that, the thought was there for a long time. We knew that was a path we would like to get on. It just, took a little while to really get a little further down. And honestly, man,
Totally.
I would say there's still, like, every day I wake up, there's no guarantee that any of it's going to work, right?
Totally.
We like what we're doing, but I could end up working at Home Depot a year from now and just be like the most fucking knowledgeable guy in an orange apron in history. So, we'll see how it goes.
I have a hard time believing that would be the outcome if everything went to shit. But yeah, it's an option. I heard they have great benefits. Dude, it's like basically full-time working on PTO. It's like, is anyone there really even that checked in?
Yeah. There you go.
But okay, so I think like you made the comment earlier, like blood and guts, like you guys got the itch 10 years ago and you got your opportunity a year ago, less than a year ago, right?
Yeah,
like, I think that's impressive in itself. Go ahead.
To be fair, I mean, we had built up a really solid brand and a really solid pipeline over that 10 years. It wasn't like we went, from zero. We spent most of that period doing like $2 to $5 million luxury infill homes, a lot of customs, a lot of specs, but really, architecturally interesting, high level of execution, high level of detail, really demanding clients, whether it was a spec or a custom. So we benefited from that experience. And what you find along the way with that, especially doing high-end customs, which I personally hate and, would do as few as possible for the rest of my life. But some of those clients were fantastic people to learn from. Some of them were executives, things like that taught us a lot about just, I think, business in general, not necessarily the construction business specifically, but, it kind of showed, at least for me, it kind of showed that, yeah, there are levels and levels and levels. And, you sort of figure out pretty quickly that if you're not the dumbest and brokest guy in every room, you're probably fucking up, because that's where you learn. You learn a lot from that.
Totally. Focus on getting into the room where you're not the sharpest tack, which again is hard for you guys. I mean, you guys are, you're pretty sharp guys.
No, it's all relative.
Yeah. It's all relative. Okay, cool. So 10 years. And like, again, if for anyone that's listening, like you should definitely look up JDB, Joseph Design Build in Austin. They build an exceptional product. It's always been interesting. And I might have like a bias towards you guys, because like, obviously we've been working with you forever. But point being is like, I'm interested, even based on the Thomas episode, of like what you guys are getting ready to do now. right? And I think Thomas's perspective and explanation was great. I would be curious to know like how yours differs in terms of going from, what'd you say, 15 to 20 units, and
Yeah.
it's a $2 to $5 million product, right? So you're going from that and then going into the product that you're getting ready to scale. Let's hear a little
Yeah.
about that.
And what we're scaling now, it's different. Instead of being, large, extremely architectural single family, there were some zoning changes in Austin that allowed for sort of medium density. So instead of one unit on a lot, now we're able to do three, and we're able to subdivide certain infill lots into, smaller lots that can each do three. And so you end up with these sort of pocket subdivisions. So it's sort of, it's like building an entry level version of what we were doing. So still incredibly design focused, high end materials, really interesting looking product. But instead of 4 to 5 million, it might be between like 750,000 and 2 million at the very high end. So what we wanted to do with that, what that zoning allowed us to do was kind of unlock the ability to start delivering this to, a wider audience. Because most people, I think, for a long, long time, that kind of home building has been pretty inaccessible to all but the top like 1%. And that's unfortunate, because what you find out pretty quickly is that your cost structure doesn't change all that much with a high design product if you do it intentionally. And if you are smart about procurement. For instance, we buy about 70% of our materials overseas direct from wholesalers in other countries and ship it over here. So there's a logistics component that took some figuring out. But the thesis is that it'll allow a much broader audience access to, high quality, architecturally interesting, really well built homes, not just in Austin, but, Dallas and Houston and eventually other markets as well. Really, the goal is to get this, we're trying to grow this up as big as we can. We think the demand's there. We think the timing's right. And then it's just, the test is, can we do 5 years worth of what would take an operation 5 years to do successfully? Can we do it in a year and a half? So that's sort of our Manhattan project.
Yeah, dude, I love it. I'm super stoked to follow this along. I think even like going back to like, again, this just pivot to me is just like insane. Like a 9-month window. Obviously, this isn't just like wake up one day, figure it out, and we go. Like you get to this 10-year precursor of, building up a reputation, understanding how to do things right, get to a position to where you are now. But like when you made a comment like the procurement side, I'm sitting here like you guys are working direct with wholesalers. Is that the right term? Overseas
manufacturers, yeah.
Manufacturers, not wholesalers, direct with manufacturers overseas. Like I imagine the only way to get into that conversation is with a level of scale and volume. Or is that something that other builders should be looking at doing? Could you have done that as a 15 to 20 unit a year guy?
Yeah, we could have. We just didn't know. Hadn't figured that out. That was actually introduced to us by a couple of our new partners that had been doing it on the commercial construction side. And the more we got looking at it, we said, yeah, you can do this. And I mean, it's a little easier to do at scale. There are certain minimums that some of these factories will participate in, but it unlocks a whole new level of pricing. It unlocks a whole new level of options. I mean, they'll literally, these factories can custom build just about anything you want. Some will do it on a one-off. Some you might need to buy 10 or 20, and some have really high minimum orders. But, in construction, by way of trying to tie it back to, a financing related discussion, you can only beat the subs up so much, and you can only, kind of chisel so much, and everybody ends up with this same 5 to 10%, target zone of a reduction in cost. We were able to get a 40% reduction in our build costs over the last 6 months and deliver an equal quality product just by handling procurement differently. Now, it's complicated. You have to deal with factories in other countries. You have to deal with time zones, the language barriers, the shipping, all of the, the tariffs, everything that goes into that. But you can do it. I'm not the smartest guy in this business. And, we've been able to gain a lot of ground very quickly looking at how to do that and how to expand on that. Like I said, we had a lot of good advice and a lot of help from partners who had done it before. We were able to take that and run with it.
Totally, dude. But a 40%, call it discount.
Yeah.
That's worth figuring it out on.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
That's a big deal. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, and it all translates to, healthier margins and the ability to, to underwrite projects that just probably wouldn't work any other way. So it's a tremendous advantage. And yeah, I would encourage anybody to look at it. My, sense of it is that most people probably won't. But I think it's definitely the wave. I think it's the wave of the future in construction. Nationals are starting to do it, and pretty much everybody else should be looking at that if they're not already.
Dude, yeah, 40%. That's insane. I think, but that's where it goes into like the hard part of it. But like even when you're thinking about it from a time spend standpoint, it's like, dude, 40% savings on, and maybe is it a 40% on all material or just like a bulk of it? How
No,
would you
that's yeah.
phrase that?
That's say we had a budget that just for conversation. Say it was $100 a foot in Austin with all local vendors and suppliers. That becomes a $60 a foot budget. Now that's not real
That's
numbers. I'm just tying it to a metric, but
of
um,
course.
yeah, no, it's significant, and that's probably more exaggerated in hot markets like Austin, like Southern California, parts of Florida, places where construction costs are just incredibly inflated because of demand and everything else that drives them up. Most of which is just profit that goes straight to the subs and vendors. But you find out pretty quickly that's mostly all it is. It's not really what those things cost. So anyway,
Okay. So, but no, dude, this I've never heard this take before. I think this is huge for the listeners. Obviously, it's going to come with a pain in the ass, but I'm looking at this, dude, and I'm like, a 40% net savings across the board.
yeah,
Hire someone, hire a team of people, dude, figure it
no,
out, right?
and we're not the only ones doing it. I mean, for sure, we're not the first ones
Of
to do it.
course.
Not taking credit for that. There are others. I mean, I believe there's even other groups just in my market that are doing that and have been for a while. So yeah, it's you start. I think the only smart thing I've ever done in construction is to continue to be curious about how to figure things out. And,
Yeah.
in doing that, you find all kinds of interesting stuff if you are willing to just quit fucking around and really see if it's something that, you can do or not. And I think, unfortunately, that's a limiting factor a lot of times, which is in this business and probably every other, but definitely in residential construction, there's a tendency to just sort of do things the way we've always done them over and over and over. And it's very slow to change and it's very slow to adapt and embrace, a new idea or a new technology, whatever it is. There's still guys walking around fucking job sites in every city in America with yellow legal pads, writing down notes about how to do things. Nothing wrong with it, but there's a couple of better options that have come along in the last 40 years. So
Totally.
trying to be
Totally.
more open to that.
Yeah. Of course. Well, dude, and it's hard to kick, those white Monster energy drinks and
So,
cigarettes at 5 a.m. from the gas station.
that's yeah, I get a little sentimental. The smell of like diesel fumes and Marlboro Reds at 5 a.m. on a job site. I'm like, oh man, take me back. But
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Take you back to your roots. Stop.
that's right.
Gabe. Yeah, love
Well,
it.
fifth grade was a
Um,
lot of fun.
yeah. Fifth grade. Start them young up in upstate New York.
That's right.
Um, cool. Okay, so I love it. So that's like, hey, that's a huge takeaway. The 40% margin on the procurement side. What are some of the other big things that you've learned just working with these guys in Houston? Like, what would you say is probably like the biggest, like most impactful side aside from this? I imagine this has got to be up there, the procurement side.
I think the thing that we're seeing in terms of how to grow that volume, more or less exponentially, is that so much of it has to do with the strategy and not the tactics. And I think most builders I know focus way too much on tactics. It's the nuts and bolts. It's the type of insulation. It's the type of HVAC system. All that's fine, but that doesn't answer the question of how do I assemble a team and build a lot of these in cities I
Yep.
don't live in that I'm probably not going to see all that often. How do I make sure that still meets the standard and the expectation of the operation? And
Yeah.
when you start thinking about it that way, then it becomes more of a puzzle of who do I need? Where do I need to put them? What systems? What processes? How do I standardize this? How do I run this efficiently? And I'm not doing it alone. I direct the residential construction, the architecture, and the engineering, and some of the strategy side, at the partner level. But I'm not taking credit for it. I have a lot of help from a lot of really good people, and that's the first thing is get really good people in place, put them in the right position, and trust them to do well. Doesn't mean don't watch them. Everybody needs that, but
Mhm.
you can't do it alone. And that took a long time to let go of that idea that I'm the authority. I know better than everybody. I'm going to do it all myself. That doesn't work beyond a certain threshold. Works really well if you're going to do 4 or 5 projects a year and deal with the clients yourself. Nothing wrong with it. So it can be a good lifestyle business, but if you want to expand, you gotta open up.
Totally. And I think that's like everyone says that. That's like
Yeah, I believe it.
just very basic. When I say basic, it's like it's the advice that makes sense, right? the processes, the systems, hire great people, let it go, trust your people, stuff like that. You mentioned though that you had to
For the
let
record, I
go
want to be
of
real clear. It's let go of total control over everything. It's not let go in the sense that you still got to be. I don't believe there's a way to do this if you're not on all the time and grinding all the time and putting in the hours, paying attention to everything. Like people got to believe, right down to the guy swinging a hammer, that you see everything that's happening, right or wrong. If you give that up, if they think you're fucking off on a boat or a golf course, good luck to you, because I don't think that's gonna. I couldn't do it that way.
Dude, well, that's what I wanted to know is like, what does that actually look like? Right.
That looks like for me, on average, like 60 to 70 hours a week in the control tower, watching everything all the time. And some of that's company cam, some of that's builder trends, some of that's we're actually developing an internal software that'll bring a few of these things together. It's a lot of communication and it has to be efficient. You have
Yep.
to, I've got, in a given day, I have a team of architects in Mexico, team of architects in the Philippines, team of engineers in the Philippines, construction team in Dallas, Houston, Austin, and then the staff here in the office with me. So that's not bragging. That's not a flex. Just saying, okay, that's the reality. So you better be organized or that's going to get fucked up real quick.
Yep.
And not that everybody needs to do it that way. It's just a really cost effective, efficient way that we've adopted to do it, to get all of these pieces to land at the same time when you want to land. But yeah, that's a lot of it. It's similar to air traffic control. It's just make sure that we smash into each other.
Yeah. Okay. What was that growing pain for you? Because like, were you the guy that was like, I know everything, like I've been doing this forever, I'm the authority, and like, what
Total,
was kind of the go ahead.
total idiot. And that's probably the biggest failure I've had in my career. Is it took me a long time to mature enough to where I could listen to other people long enough to hear what they had to say instead of just immediately shutting them down, being like, no, that's dumb. I know what I'm doing. I've built 1,000,000 square feet, blah, blah, blah. I regret that. That was a bad attitude to have for a very long time. I think I started opening up to it when the market kind of turned down here in Austin, a couple of years ago. We kind of had to look around and go, hey, that didn't work. Things are slowing down. And there is a sobering moment where, you kind of realize that it doesn't matter. I think this is a real threat for everybody. It doesn't matter if you build the best house and you paid the most attention and the execution was flawless. And you had good relationships with your staff and your subs and everything else. It might not matter at all. The market might just turn against you and you still lose. Even if you made all the right decisions, even if you played all the cards right, you might still get hammered. And that can happen and it's out of everybody's control. So when that happened, there's a tendency to look inward and say, all right, what did I screw up? What could I have done differently? What do I think I fucked up? Talking to my brother a lot, talking to other people. Hey, what do you think about this? And certainly I think we all made mistakes in that period and, continue to make mistakes forever. But I think a market downturn has a way of driving introspection that's pretty beneficial if you're open to, being honest about it.
Totally.
So I'd say it made me an expert in failure.
Yeah. Well, I think like just beautiful that like it sucked, and I actually know it sucked. I think I was talking to Thomas like during that time, and
Oh yeah,
he was not in a good spot. But as you guys do, you made it, you persevered, and now you're like coming out like an incredible leg.
yeah. You gotta be.
Good.
Yeah, you got to be resilient. You got to be able to get through those times. I think you learn a lot more in the down markets than you do in the up markets for sure.
Totally. My question is like, is this just like fluffy, wishful thinking, never going to happen? Or can you take that type of self-awareness, introspection, consideration without the burn? Or do you think that the burn is a necessary component to changing how you do things or looking
That's a really
inward?
good question. I mean, I like to think there are people smarter than me that were able to do that without having to go through an absolute ass whipping. For me, it took that. I'm sure it's possible. Sounds a lot more comfortable.
Yeah. Okay, that could just be a fluffy
Yeah.
question.
So the short answer is, yeah, I think going forward, it's a thing that, you just want to be watching all the time. The same way you'd look at a P&L or a balance sheet or a budget, at a regular interval, you probably at some point, if you're going to try to grow and if you're going to try to lead a bunch of people, you need to be really aware of what you're doing and how you're impacting them downstream. Because I can't take credit for anything we're doing. I have an amazing team of really smart, really capable people. And without them, none of that would work. And partners too. And without them, none of this would work. So it's not so much me. It's a collection of other people that are able to make those things happen.
Totally. Totally. You've been talking about the team a lot. And I've like actually like here in the last few weeks, months, I've been working with them a decent amount. And I've got to know them and they're certainly sharp. You've got a good team over there. I talked to a lot of builders. You've got a good squad.
No, thanks.
How do you find them? How did that
So
whole thing work?
I I like picking a team. I like the GM
You're the
role
recruiter, huh?
of doing the draft. Yeah, I it's a funny thing is I think there's a tendency to pick friends and relatives and things like that, and we've certainly got a few of those. I mean, shit, my brother's one of the partners, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't draft Thomas. For the record, Thomas drafted me is the origin story. He
I love
started
it.
it, invited me on. So
You were in
um,
DC, weren't you?
I
Or
was in
were
DC. Yeah,
Baltimore? You were in DC, yeah.
yep. I was in Washington. Saw what was going on in Austin, and moved out a month later. So it was just that strong of a market at that time. But I think in evaluating people, you're looking at a skill set, you're looking at personality matches, you're looking at experience, but you're really looking for sort of core attributes more than anything else. Like, yeah, they have to have experience doing whatever that is, but you really have to look at, all right, is this person a grinder? Is this person lazy? Is this person going to put in, is this a whatever it takes person, which is what I'm always going to gravitate toward? Or is this a do as little as possible and hide from the job kind of thing? And the sort of why of what they're doing is a lot more important in a lot of cases. Like I've had people that were, you know, curious, hungry, wanted to figure it out, wanted to get better, wanted to learn the job, but didn't have a lot of experience who turned out to be great. And then I've had people that had a lot of experience that turned out to be terrible because once they saw the expectations and the workload, it just spooks. So on paper, they were fantastic, but reality
Yeah.
is, paper tigers.
Okay, so in that, like, I imagine there's like just there was a lot of learning that happened over the last 15 years of hiring great people, hiring awful people.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
when you're talking about the attributes, I mean, it sounds like the grinder thing. Like that's not you can't just like ask someone in an interview like how many hours do you work in a week because they're gonna tell you 80,
You know what
and
I
then
always
it's
ask
like,
people
how do you
is,
do it?
well, one thing that's always worked is ask people about work-life balance and tell them to express it as a percentage. Most people will reflexively tell you the truth. Um, and it's usually going to be a lower number than you want to hear. But that if I were to go back and graph it, I'll bet you that question has been answered honestly 90% of the time over the last several years. And the right answer, boys and girls, is anybody that says less than 70 is probably not going to do the job you want them to do.
Yeah.
So, and it goes up from there. But yeah, that's a really good litmus test for how hard somebody wants to push on something.
Yeah, I think that work life balance is like it's a super hot conversation now. Whether and it sounds like in construction, in tech, really wherever, and like there's been like such a priority on like what is work life balance. And I think you mentioned it earlier is like it has to go back to the why. But I think when you do, if you hear someone that's like, oh, it's all about work life balance, I got to do this, that, and the other. It's like, what are
Well,
you really doing?
construction, probably no business works that way, but what you find in construction more than anything, and I love this about the business, is that you do get a lot of people that are just, doing a job and this and that, but most people that you meet that are in it are really in it. Like they
Hmm.
wouldn't do anything else, or they couldn't, we're a bunch of goons that are virtually unemployable in any other line of work. Um, but they can take it and they can handle the heat and the weather and the unpredictability and the variables and all the things that go with this business that it's kind of hard not to get into that, right? It's kind of hard not to find that interesting. Um, and then to me, it just becomes an efficiency thing. Like I don't think you need to be demanding your, staff work 80 hours a week. If they can get it done in 40, great. It's more about hitting the targets consistently and getting the outcome. And for us, we try to keep the emphasis on the outcome while following a process and not just, steps for the sake of steps. Like it's got to be toward a goal.
Totally, dude. I love it. I love it. What
I realize I've said almost nothing about construction. I'm getting off in the philosophical weeds on here, man. Sorry about that.
dude, there's no room for apologies on builders, budgets, and beers. We're just having a conversation. I think this is totally applicable. I mean, what do you think the cost of a bad hire is if we want to rope it back in?
Depends, right? I mean, if it's a superintendent, probably not so bad. If it's a CFO, catastrophic.
Yeah.
Really depends on the person. I've had both those experiences. So,
Let's hear
you
about
know,
those.
well, I mean, I
As
think
much as you want to share. How about that? How about
with,
that?
okay, so with a bad financial person, obviously the risk of like, fraud and theft and those things go up. And we've had to deal with that in the past. With a superintendent, you know, field construction management, most of those expensive mistakes are going to be, errors in judgment or things they just didn't understand and know how to do. So, I would say the tricky part about residential construction, separate from commercial, is the average mistake somebody's going to make is probably between $10,000 and $30,000. You can only afford to take so many of those hits on a job.
Totally.
So my rule is everybody gets one, and if we can't make you better, if we can't improve people after that, well, maybe they aren't a great fit. But I'll tell you honestly, I've had very little turnover. Very few people who have ever quit. I've fired a lot of people, but I've had very few people quit. And I think that's probably more credit to them than me. But yeah, it's expensive.
I was going to ask, like, what do you think? What do you think? It's because they like building for like the big JDB brand in Austin, or do you think it's that they get to work on really cool stuff? Do you think it's you and Thomas? It's culture.
I don't think it's me. I think it's culture, though. I think if you want to get, and this especially applies to the growth factor, but even before that, obviously the entire business is run by people, and I think the mistake is to put the emphasis on the nuts and bolts and the materials and the subs and all of that. What I always have told people is that, this is the home team and everybody else that's excluding clients, obviously. Everybody else is the enemy. Everybody else is trying to take something away from this business. And so our position has to be defense first and then offense literally the other 90% of the time, because the subs aren't your friend. They're trying to take something away or trying to take more for them than they are for you. I turn over about half our subs every year. Mostly.
Really?
Oh yeah. I don't believe for a second in this idea that you have to have long-term friendly relationships with subcontractors. That's just not true.
Dude, let's dig. That's like the total opposite of what I hear. I want to hear it.
I might be a little contrarian on this, but what I've found is that half our subs are long-term relationships, great people who run well-run businesses. The other half are people who maybe are good or technically good, but they run a shitty business. And that's the most expensive mistake. It's usually not somebody you hire directly. It's people leaving things out of the bid or hitting you with, change orders that make no sense, or, who just have no financial system or acumen whatsoever. I mean, literally like invoices written on the like ticket book they use at, Sonic. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But so I don't have any, and the reality is there's a lot of them. So there is no need to keep them and to, to work with them and to, be friends with them and all of this stuff. I think that's actually counterproductive. Every city has a huge volume of capable, qualified people that can actually do the work. You just got to find it.
So I think that like, as contrarian it might sound, like at face value, that's actually like probably a really good takeaway, is like basically what you're doing is you're just holding the people you work with to a standard.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
A standard of operating a business.
Yeah.
And like,
why would you trust like you look at like the average, I'm going to pick on drywall guys. You look at a drywall company that has like their girlfriend running QuickBooks because she took a 2-hour class, and that's the entire operational structure of that entity. And you're going to trust them with a few $1 million worth of work. Like no other business does that, except for residential construction. Commercial construction doesn't do that. Everything is buttoned up really tight. And so, to me, it's like, well, just because other people in the market do that, is that smart? Like, does that really make a lot of sense? I've never gotten past that viewpoint. So
totally, dude. I think again, the reason why like I'm like supportive of the idea is because I think that's where it needs to go, right? Like in order, like you talk about like these labor shortages and like the cost of buildings going up, and like these builders that are winning are taking these like more serious approaches. Is like I think it really does kind of fall on the GC to hold someone accountable. Like I'll use an example. Like I know a builder that builds up in like a very like it's not a metropolitan area, it's a rural area, and their sub market and vendor market isn't super dense. So
Sure.
like they are kind of held to like whoever's going to do it's going to do it. But dude, there are
Sure.
stories that I hear of like an $80,000 excavation invoice that wasn't even like put together. Like the general
Sure.
contractor has to build the invoices for this sub, and then they won't even come in and pick up a check. It's like the check is here for you. You got to pick. We've had a check for 6 months on the desk. It turns into an office running joke of like, when is this guy going to come and pick up the check, right?
Yeah,
And it's like
that
you can't have that. You can't support that. You can't enable that. You got to
no.
be like, dude, figure your shit out.
Yeah, that's right. You're a business. You should be looking after your business's interests first. And part of that is don't associate with non-businesses that just happen to have, a truck and a phone and a, magnet slapped on the door. That doesn't make them a business. That just means they, know how to paint or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, to us, we've always treated it as a business first, which means take care of your people first. And by the way, that doesn't mean I'm not endorsing being, like cruel to the subs. I'm not. I think you got to be ruthless. You got to be honest, but you don't have to mistreat them. I think that's probably a mistake as well. And I'm guilty of that in a lot of stories in the past. But, and sometimes it's necessary, but most of the time it's more easier to just say, look, this guy's a loser. Just get rid of him and get somebody else.
Yeah, totally. To like, just to like play like devil's advocate here. Do you think that like that is a theory, a logic, a perspective that should be exercised or applied in sub and vendor dense markets? Or do you think that should just be like status quo for everybody, regardless of what your sub talent pool is? Go ahead.
It's a good distinction to make, right? I mean, I think if you're in a town and it's 50,000 people or less, yeah, there may only be 5 plumbers that do what you're doing, and so you do have to be a little more diplomatic about it. But if you're in a larger market, there are hundreds of people available to do this that are probably all about the same. And the reason I say this is, subcontractors are primarily what we refer to as labor pimping, right? Those aren't their guys swinging a hammer. They're just subbing the contract out to another crew who's then just coming in, and you're just paying the spread on that. And so kind of, I think in all things, just looking deeper, am I paying a labor pimp, or are these the actual guys that own it? And looking into that and kind of peeling those layers off to get down to the root of it. Not only does it help your pricing, you end up getting better response and easier management out of it. So
totally. Well, they have more skin in the game. They care more.
Yeah, exactly. And it, separates lien rights and all these other things. So yeah, that's, I guess, an example of what I mean by looking at it really more as a business and less as a lifestyle. Being really in your analysis of those things.
So what does subcontractor relations look like as you're going through the scale period? Dude, because you're not running the same guys that you were. Maybe you are, but like there's just not enough of them. You need more of them, right?
You need to have a deep bench. And honestly, at this point, there's a few layers between me and the subs. And so I'm not interacting with them. Hardly ever. I'm really just reviewing contracts and pricing at that point. But I would say that, even at the level of doing, 10 to 20 a year, having as an owner, having, that layer of project management, that kind of buffer between you and them is incredibly important. It just frees up a ton of bandwidth. It frees up your ability to make decisions clearly. You don't get over reliant on personal relationships with these guys. I think that's a must have. Keeping that separation, keeping it as like siloed, and having no imagination about the dynamic between builder and sub is pretty critical. Too often the line gets blurred.
For sure. And I think it's easy, like you'd mentioned, like the smaller, like, dude, doing like 15 to 20 units at the product that you guys are delivering is like a really big business in residential construction. You talk to the guys that are doing like 5 to 8 units, that are doing 10 to 15 million in top line. Like, I feel like that's still really easy for them to get involved with, like subcontractors, day to day, controlling that stuff. Do you think that? Go ahead.
I think it's a choice, right? It's, do you want to, that's a business. There's nothing wrong with it. Is that where you want to be? Right. If you want to stay at that level, if you're comfortable with that, do it. If not, I'd give the same advice I'd take, which is quit fucking around and look at a bigger picture. And you'd be amazed at how you'd be amazed at how many people aren't working up to the capabilities that they currently have, just because it's what they've done, and so they just keep sustaining.
Totally. And this kind of goes back to the initial question of like, do you think that it requires a hardship, for lack of a better term, to like get out of that just cycle of bullshit? Or do you think it's just a true one thing, dude? Like sometimes guys are just like, dude, I'm doing 10 million in top line. Hopefully I'm clearing a 10% net on this. Like I'm making plenty of money. I can buy trucks. I can take big vacations. I can send kids to private school, whatever. Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think if people are being honest, the whole business is a hardship, right? Like you're combining all the elements of production, logistics, entrepreneurism, in a wildly variable market with a lot of, unpredictability, city inspections and financing and third party clients, all these things. So none of it's easy. And so if it's all going to be, hard anyway, why not look at a bigger target? I had a really interesting conversation with a guy who was a project executive for like the third or fourth largest commercial GC in Texas. These guys built stadiums and schools and things like that. And his personal pipeline he was managing was about 1.5 billion at that time. And I said, I talked to him, I said, hey man, what's the hardest part? Like, what's the most difficult thing at that scale? And he goes, oh man, it's getting people to pay change orders, and it's getting the office to not screw up the accounting. And it was all the exact same stuff that at that time we were dealing with as a small builder. And I was going, shit. So it never gets any better. And he goes, nope, it's like this all the way up. And I was like, well, that's depressing. But in a way, it's also encouraging because it means that, there are only so many pieces involved in that business. Then you just start figuring out how they work and keep figuring it out. And, hopefully we'll get there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's certainly some peace in the fact that like the problems that you can anticipate a massive company having, you're already dealing with. So you're just gonna get really good at figuring out how to prevent them.
Yeah, it's really it's how fast can you solve problems, and more importantly, how many of them can you anticipate and eliminate before they present themselves as something that's actually going to be expensive, whether that's time, money, or both.
Yeah.
So I get that this is a much more like maybe philosophical discussion about the construction business and not so much the technical details, but I think I spend a lot more time thinking about this than I do the spreadsheet and the bid and the budget and why the framer didn't show up today, because all that's going to happen anyway.
Totally. Gabe, you do not need to apologize again. Because I think that's what makes the show good, is like kind of getting like this like perspective that other builders carry. We talked enough about finance. You don't have to worry about this. We're not here to check boxes. We're just here to hold warm conversation, Gabe.
Yeah, and also Adaptive's fantastic. Everybody should use Adaptive. I actually believe that 100%. Reece didn't pay me to say that. He didn't bribe me with podcast invites. And he's not holding anybody hostage. So
dude, I think everyone feels like obligated to leave some little plug. Like I'm like doing my best to get people that don't use Adaptive on the podcast just so they don't feel obligated to plug it. Yeah, I do. I had a guy on yesterday, and he still felt the need. Tyler Grace is going to be a great episode, and he's actually like the polar opposite of like what you're doing. And I respect the hell out of Tyler because like he's like you're gonna have to listen to the episode. You said that you're a devout listener; you'll hear it. But point being, huh?
I'll totally listen to it.
Yeah, you got to listen to it. But he doesn't even use Adaptive, and he we're like what 30 minutes into this thing, and he just like tried to give like a shameless plug. I'm like, dude, you don't even use the product. Like, you don't have to do this. Okay, we'll wrap this up. But okay, on the philosophical thread, you had mentioned like some of the things that you're focusing on the business standpoint, but what role did you fill compared to what role did Thomas fill? Who what tell me like the personalities, like the gaps, the roles in the company, all that stuff. Like how do you and Thomas like jive together in this thing?
Yeah, so we're brothers, which means we fight 50% of the time, but nobody there's no bleeding, nothing is thrown. No, our initial setup, Thomas moved out to Austin, started the business by way of running into somebody that was building specs and saw the margins, and they were really good, and managed to meet an investor who put up the money and got one going, and then got a couple more. And then he called me up and said, look at these numbers. This is what's going on here. And I said, you're full of shit. Those aren't real. You can't do math. And that turned into a conversation, but turned out he was right. And so he convinced me to move out here, and it was the best decision I ever made. And our rules have been historically that he would handle really sales, marketing, fundraising, investor relations, which is just massively important. It's more important than the construction side for a development company. He would handle that, and I would handle the operations. So I would handle construction management. I would handle the staff. We would both kind of manage the strategic decisions of the company, the vision, where we wanted to go, being aligned. And that's incredibly important. And we've never had any disagreements about that. We don't get into fights about important big picture things. We get into stupid fights about how many windows should be on one wall when we're working with the designers. So it's nothing, really damaging, but that was kind of our roles then. And now it's just sort of a bigger version of that, right? I'm overseeing construction, design, engineering, permitting, all that stuff. And he's working on all the acquisitions. He's built a really, really forward-thinking sales and marketing operation. We're using a lot of automation in everything we do. We're using a lot of the kind of available AI tools. Really trying to build the operation to be capable to scale to 500 or 1,000 homes a year. So he's got his hands full with that side, and his personality is perfect for that. Charismatic, warm, engaging. People like him. And I'm the exact opposite, which makes me really qualified to run construction, but not great at sales. And so I've always benefited from a partnership. It's hard to be one person to be everything. And so we've always played upon our strengths of having kind of complementary skill sets.
Yeah. You're like the great American bison, just grazing on the plains, just
easy to shoot,
hauling ass. What's that?
I said easy to shoot, slow on my feet, a pretty visible target.
Yeah, and Thomas is just like the trophy white-tailed deer, just
right.
gallivanting. Yeah, exactly. No, I love it, dude. This was great. You don't need to apologize because I think you brought a ton of great perspective. I think your guys' journey is incredible. Again, for the listeners, you definitely need to listen to Thomas's episode as well as Gabe's, because they're obviously running the same business, but they all two totally different episodes. Definitely a group that you're going to want to follow along to. Gabe, do you have anything that you want to share with the listeners before we sign off here? Any words of wisdom more so than you've already shared? Any tips, tricks, anything like that?
Nope. Go figure it out. It's out
there. Go
there.
figure it out, baby. Go figure it out.
And thanks for having me on, man. This was fun. It's good talking. It's good catching up. So let us know next time you're in Austin.
Yeah, 100%. You guys are gonna be staying in Austin, headquartered there forever noise?
The mothership. Yep.
The mothership. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll definitely let you know. The bride and I moved up to Boston, so we're not near as close. But I actually do think I'm going to be down there in November.
Okay,
so
cool.
yeah, in San Antonio, Austin area. So I will. I'll let you guys know. I might make it a longer week. And we'll get together.
All right.
Get some Terry Blacks. I'm sure you love Terry Blacks.
Sure. Yeah. Right down the street. Why not?
Hell yeah, brother. Alrighty. Well, dude, you enjoy the rest of your week. Appreciate you for jumping on, and we'll just chat soon.
All right, man. Later.
See ya.